Hello friends and greetings for the day. Welcome back to another episode of our tutorials on ISTQB Foundation Level 4.0. Finally, we have completed all the chapters and it's time for us to do a quick summarization. So this video will be completely guiding you with what we have covered so far in one single video. And at the same time, we'll also be talking about the key important aspects of this entire training. At the same time, what are the things what you need to take care of when you do your preparation before the examinations. So to get started, we'll be looking into each chapter one by one and then getting into the conclusion of it. Well, to start with the very first chapter, which is called as Fundamentals of Testing, of course, here we covered five major topics. The very first topic what you had was related to the concepts of fundamentals of testing, which included keywords like testing and debugging, talking about QA and QC, which is quality assurance and quality control. In fact, many other basic terminologies like error, mistake, bug, fault, defect, failure, the relationship between fault and failure and root cause analysis, which is really to talk about how does a fix of a defect turns into root cause analysis and how root cause fixing would impact or create a side effect introducing regressions into a system. So it's very crucial for someone to understand these relationships and deal with them at the same time. So what is testing, which is fundamentals of concepts of testing, was covered in the very first topic. Then we went through why testing is important. Of course, in part of why testing is important, we went through the psychological aspect of testing, that why it is important for someone else to test and how exactly testers contribute to the overall life cycle by being proactively participating throughout the life cycle by conducting initially static testing and later down the line the dynamic testing. So testing has a complete different set of contribution to be made when it comes to the overall process, which we covered as a part of this. When we came to the third segment, we spoke about principles of testing. There we covered 7 standard principles of testing. Number 1, testing shows presence of defect, not their absence. Number 2, exhaustive testing is impossible, so we have techniques to cater them, and techniques will help you reduce the number of test cases, but do not try to test all possible combinations of data, which is input. Principle number 3, early testing saves time and money, so static testing is important. Testers should be involved as soon as the first drafts are available and get involved in that. Also talking about the principle 4, which is defect clustering. Defects are not always distributed, they can be gathered together as well. Tests wear out, which is pesticide paradox, that any test suite must be revised over a period of time as the product evolves. Then next one is testing is context dependent. 2 different applications are not tested with same approach. And of course, the last one, defect fallacy, which is absence of defect is also a failure, which certainly means that requirements are equally important, not just fixing and finding defects. So these were the 7 principles what we covered there. 1.4 went through the test where, the test activities, and the test roles. Test activities are crucial here. Of course, every single phase is important to be remembered, that what is planning, what is monitoring and control, test analysis, test design, test implementation, test execution, and test completion. And here each phase has set of activities which are very standardized. Don't forget, you need to create the relationship between the test design and test implementation. Like test design talks about identifying the test data, whereas test implementation talks about preparing the test data. Same way, test design talks about designing the environment, whereas test implementation talks about implementing the environment. So it's just that key important things what you will have to create an understanding about prior to saying that you know what exactly you have learned. So the questions will be drafted in such a way that they will try to trick you by using these key elements from the syllabus, not just being very straightforward. So we also went through other phases like test executions, test completion, and so on. So we have to know all the phases and the respective activities uniquely as well, that what's that which does not happen in some other phases. Okay, so that's one thing. Then we spoke about the various test fair which are created as a part of the entire life cycle. So the various work products are like test plan, test cases, test execution report, defect report, test completion report, and so on, right? So we also learned about the traceability there. So traceability certainly builds the required coverage and many other benefits which you can always recall and refer. Then we went to the testing roles. We told you that there are two standard roles, test manager and test engineer. The planning, monitoring control, and test completion are the responsibilities of the manager, whereas analysis, design, uh, execution, implementation are the responsibilities of the test engineer. And the last topic in the chapter 1 we covered was related to the skill set of a test engineer. At the same time, we covered how exactly whole team approach works, how independent a test team can be with independence of testing, and we covered benefits and drawbacks of that. So put together, these are all the key elements which you should know at this point of time, that how exactly the chapter 1 drives different context and what are the key important things what you should have understood right from there. Moving on to the chapter 2, of course, as a part of chapter 2, we were talking about the software development lifecycle and how testing gets practiced here. The very first segment, what you covered was related to how testing varies in terms of efforts and contributions when it comes to different SDLC models. It's not the same when it comes to traditional with respect to that of an agile methodology. The effort varies, and there are many other significant characteristics which are even applied particularly to each of these models. But at the same time, you should remember those four golden characteristics, which are the good practices which can be applied to any development model, irrespective of what you follow. That is, every testing development activity must have a corresponding testing activity. Each process, each level must have objectives specific to that level. At the same time, we do talk about testers should be involved as soon as drafts are available, and the activities what we get started with is test analysis and test design, right? So these are the four common characteristics which are applicable to any development model, and irrespective of what you are following. So there are some unique differences in terms of how testing gets practiced in a life cycle, but at the same time, we do have the common characteristics which are applicable to any development model, and that's how they ask you the question from. So at the same time, we discussed a lot of other things. A lot of other things here basically meant that we had an introduction to how testing can be seen as a driver for the development, how DevOps and testing work, how shift left testing is applied in the world today, then what is the need of retrospective, and how does it help in process improvement. So there were lots of such concepts which we applied here and tried understanding that testing really can be different when it comes to different methodologies, and the way it gets practiced needs to be an awareness for the test engineer to help them understand, right? So put together, that was the very first section. The second section covered about the test levels and the test types. As a part of the test levels, we covered about component testing, which is also called as unit testing. Then we covered about component integration testing. We had system testing, then system integration testing, and then we also had something called as acceptance testing, where you covered things related to alpha and beta testing, and that pretty much took everything into account, right? Then test types, of course, we differentiated between functional and non-functional. You should know what are the key differences between that, what are the levels under it. Like, namely, of course, non-functional is not a part of our syllabus, so you should not break your head for getting into what is performance testing, what is security testing, etc. But at this point, all you should know is that what is the difference between functional and non-functional. The levels what we have covered in our syllabus are all functional. Then we also differentiated between white box and black box testing approaches for dynamic testing, and confirmation and regression testing, where confirmation is just like retesting. Okay. On the other hand, of course, we also had a small topic here to talk about was maintenance testing. We told you maintenance testing in turn is regression testing, and it helps you measure the side effects of a change every time you make an upgrade, migration, or retirement of the product. So put together, this basically completes our understanding on the chapter 2. Given that you know all these keywords and differences between them, then chapter 2 is well done for all of us. Moving on to the chapter 3, of course, chapter 3 was talking about static testing and the concepts related to that. Of course, at this point, we understood that not everything gets done just with help of dynamic testing. There are several other activities which do happen prior to dynamic testing, and every single work product should be a good candidate for static testing, because a human is error prone and you can make mistakes. Thus, reviewing any work product which is written by any individual, is a good practice in terms of process improvement, work product improvement, and minimizing your own mistakes, which in turn gives you a better quality of product. At the same time, it helps you increase the productivity of testing and development. In simple words, if I try to eliminate the defects from requirement when they are gathered, then I'll be more productive in development rather finding silly defects, right? Or getting stuck for silly defects. So there's a whole bunch of things which we of course discussed in detail there. So this particular chapter drives you first through what is static testing. Don't forget there are two different ways to do static testing: reviews and static analysis. The documents which are readable by human being and can be evaluated by going through, you call this approach as review, when you go through the document and read it yourself and review them. But on the other hand, there are certain work products like code or data flow diagrams and control flow diagrams which might not be manually evaluatable. So you need a tool to do this job for you, and that's where a static analysis comes into picture. So in simple word, the work products which are reviewed by human by reading them, we use review, and work products which are reviewed by tool, we call it as static analysis. So here we also covered what are the work products which are candidate of review. That means almost anything as a document should be a review candidate. We also highlighted here in one of the sections that what are the differences between static and dynamic testing. So you must go through that. The list of common static defects, and plus we also spoke about something called as early and frequent feedback, which is very crucial for someone to know from presentation of your work to back to the business at a defined milestone, so that you are aligned to that of the business requirements but not getting deviated from that. So in agile methodologies, we present demonstrations to the customer to make sure that they really get to see what exactly we are building, and if in case we're getting deviated, they can let us know about it. So early and frequent feedback is very important, which we do worry about. At the same time, we did see the list of those common defects which can be easily found by static testing when compared to that of dynamic testing. On the second side, that is second section of this chapter, we covered things related to review process. We spoke about the formal review process, which is a 5-stage process consisting of planning, initiate review, individual review, which is individual preparation, then communication and analysis, which is also called as review meeting, and then we also spoke about the last one, that is fixing and reporting. This formal review process consists of 6 standard roles, that is manager, moderator, review leader, reviewers, scribe, and the author, the person who has written the document under review and responsible for fixing it. So make sure that you know the process, the activities under each of the phase, the roles, and the responsibilities of the roles. Because generally here we expect match the following. One side they'll give you the review phases, one side they'll give you the activities of it, or they will give you the roles and responsibilities of it. You need to find the right match of it. Same thing will happen in the next segment, which is the review types. We covered about informal, we covered about walkthrough, technical review, and inspection. Inspection is as equal to your formal review process. So unique points have been shared there. So make sure that you remember them. At any point of time, all you need to do is match the following again. So they will give you the 4 review types on one side, and they will give you the unique points on one side, or other forms of asking the same thing. But as far as you remember the uniqueness of each type of review, you can differentiate between any 2 reviews. So that's the key thing. And we also covered the success factors related to review, which makes it very crucial. Sometimes they may give you something out of the options or examples given to you, but all you have to judge is, will this help me make a review successful, or will this be a negativity to destroy the review? So that's how you can easily make a judgment that which of this option is a success factor for the review. See, the syllabus is not about by hearting it. Never do that. It's not going to work out. Let me tell you very clearly. All you need to do is understand it. Understand in a way that you are going to apply it in your day-to-day world. And as you apply them, or you learn it in this fashion, you would always be able to crack the examination in a single go. You don't have to by heart the things or remember them. You have to understand what I'm trying to do. And chapter 3 is going to be slightly critical. The only reason is these are something which doesn't happen in day-to-day basis in most of the organization. It does happen in many organizations, but not quite often. So this is something which is going to be slightly new and things which you have never learned before. Well, moving on to the chapter 4, of course, this chapter is talking about the test analysis and design approaches or techniques. Of course, first we covered the techniques. We introduced you to the three categories in the very first section, that what is black box testing techniques, what is white box testing techniques, and what are experience-based test techniques. Quick reminder, you need to remember the basis of each of these category. Like for black box, we need requirements, or we refer requirements to apply them. If you don't have requirements, you cannot apply them. Then same way for white box, the basis is code. If you don't know how to read a code, you cannot apply white box. And experience based is all about experience, which includes the past experience of testing similar products, the domain knowledge where the product belongs, and knowledge of typical defects makes it all together to be called as experience. If you are a fresh engineer, you are not called as an experienced tester, and you cannot apply these techniques. So that's crucial, because sometimes they just get one question directly from here asking you which one of the following is one of the bases for white box testing. Then you must not be puzzled there. Then we went into each of these. For example, in the black box, we covered equivalence partition. In equivalence partition, we covered single input, double input. Single input may be simple, but double input sometimes can be a little tricky. So make sure that you just have a look once again that what is the context I mentioned there, the detail I mentioned, to track or come to a conclusion that what should be our the two input combination. So remember one thing, you have to minimize the test cases with covering each class at least once. That's the statement. We went to the BVA. In BVA, we covered again two types of it. That is 2-point analysis, 3-point analysis. So please be cautious in the examination question that which one they are asking you to apply. Sometimes they can even ask you to combine EP and BVA and ask you a question together. Then we went through decision table testing, which is going to be slightly simpler than the other two, because the table will be provided and you will be asked a question related to that. But don't forget the characteristics. The slide deck has some key pointers, and those pointers are very important to be remembered, because sometimes they just ask you a theoretical question about the technique characteristics. Same thing applies to state transition testing. That is, how do you identify a valid transition? How do you identify invalid transition? Then STD shows only valid transitions. So these are some statements which I've specified very clearly, and sometimes you do get a theoretical question there. Or of course the diagram driven, then you know how to identify the same based on those information itself. Moving on to the white box, we covered 4 parameters there with 2 techniques. The techniques what we covered was statement testing and branch testing, where branch testing is also called as decision testing. So never be, ignoring the synonyms of any terminology, because ISTQB, when they give synonyms, it means that they can use any of the terms. Okay, so statement testing and branch testing, and at the same time we covered statement coverage and branch coverage. So testing, that is statement testing and branch testing, are the techniques to find minimum number of test cases. Whereas if your team says we did not use the technique but have written some test cases, then how to measure the coverage is done by the matrix. So statement coverage and branch coverage are the matrices which we basically use to measure the required coverage or the coverage achieved by the written test cases without the technique. So both are 2 different aspects of a process. At the same time, this is at K2, so you don't really have to break your head to understand the process, like how to solve it. But anyways, in my tutorials, I've already covered that, okay, which will be helpful. And third category was experience-based test techniques, where we covered error guessing, exploratory testing, and checklist-based testing. All 3 depends on the common basis, that is experience, but has something unique about itself. Error guessing has a terminology fault attack. Exploratory testing talks about test-based sessions. Test charter are important and mandatory there. Debriefing session is a method used for reporting, and exploratory is not about randomly clicking on the application, right? So we just really need to be careful with all those keywords, what you learn in every single technique. Checklist-based testing is all about checklists. The checklist certainly contains questions which you need to answer while interacting with the product or testing the product. But the only challenge with the checklist is that it is generally out of date. So it's very important to maintain it time to time. Then we went to the last segment of this, which is certainly to talk about the test analysis approaches. And here we covered things like what is collaborative user story writing, what are the template of user story writing, and then we covered about acceptance criteria, how acceptance criteria can be written. There are standard formats for it, like given, when, then, or in the bulleted form or in the tabulated form, and so on. And then we also covered a complete process of what is acceptance test driven development, how exactly does that happen, and how test cases are derived from acceptance criteria, and then the development kicks off. So put together, chapter 4 is going to have a very good contribution to your overall success. Moving on to the next chapter, the chapter 5. The chapter 5 certainly had another major aspect of the entire testing to be discussed. So the journey starts with the basics, which is the test management altogether, which are the common test activities like what is test planning, what is the test estimation, what is test matrices, or if you talk about entry criteria, exit criteria, and few other things there to deal with. Of course, we went through a lot of things like test execution schedule, which talks about the order of execution. And right there, we also discussed the monitoring and control. We told you again that monitoring is a process of tracking the ongoing progress with help of matrices. You saw some example of the matrices. At the same time, you understood what is test control. Control here means if you observe a deviation from the plan, how exactly you can take an appropriate control action to overcome the deviation and conclude about it. At the same time, of course, we went through the understanding of the overall process, that what are those estimation methods. So we covered 4 of them. We had estimation by ratios, extrapolation, then we have wideband Delphi, and 3-point estimation. So someone should really be aware of all these things which are required at that point of time. So that's some of the things what we covered initially. Then we of course went through the risk management, which is another major chapter to talk about, or major segment to talk about. We covered about risk identification, risk assessment, risk mitigation, and risk control, which is risk management altogether. So we must know the examples of project risk and product risk from here, should be able to differentiate between them, and what exactly are the action items as a result of risk mitigation. Not everything is accepted. Sometimes risks are mitigated, transferred, and or deals with contingency. Then we also covered a topic on configuration management. The key important thing you should remember, the configuration management is all about version control, unique identification, traceability, and managing the history of revisions. This particular thing is not done manually. It's very hectic to do, so we take tool support for this. And given that we do with tool support, this is the only tool which gets rolled out in the beginning of the project. All other tools gets rolled out during test implementation. So if you remember that, you know everything about it, right? Then of course we went through the defect management. The defect management discussed about what is defect, which is covered in chapter 1 itself. But here we covered about the defect reporting, which is what is the objective of writing a defect report, and at the same time, what does the defect report consist of. So put together, that basically covers everything what we need to know from the chapter 5, and again has a great contribution to add overall value to the entire thing. And finally, to talk about the chapter 6, which is another crucial aspect of it. Of course, chapter 6 talks about the test tool. However, it's a very small chapter, but yet important to save your day at any point of time. So chapter 6 gave you an introduction to what is test tools, what type of different test tools do we have, and at the same time, what are the benefits and risk involved in using a tool. So again, just 3 topics to talk about. If you just remember the types of tools, you know about the benefits and the risk involved in using a tool, you are pretty much good with this particular chapter altogether. So yet it's just a small one, but not something which you can see as an optional, because those 2 marks could be a really booster in your bad times. So we would strongly recommend that you do not ignore this chapter, because nothing is optional here. So in this particular tutorial, we just wrapped up everything in the entire syllabus in just a small video, but yet important to recap, revise what the summary of this entire syllabus is all about. At the same time, at the end, we would like to give you the breakup of the questions, because it sometimes becomes very important for some people to really know that how the contribution of each chapter would be in my examination. So just fulfilling that expectation of all our learners as well. So the breakup of the question, as you know, that total number of questions are 40, that is 40. And the breakup is chapter 1 will have 8 questions out of 40. Chapter 2 will have 6 questions out of 40. Chapter 3 will have 4 questions. Chapter 4 will have 11 questions. Chapter 5 will have 9 questions. And chapter 6 will have 2 questions. So that's the breakup of the questions and the weightage of each chapter in the examination. So as we see that all the chapters are equally important, I would never discriminate any chapter here. But on a higher note, I would see chapter 1, chapter 4, and chapter 5 are very critical to save your day. In fact, chapter 4 and 5 together forms 20 marks. That is, chapter 4 has 11 questions and chapter 5 has 9 questions. So 20 marks lies just in these 2 chapters, and then 8 marks in right chapter 1. Then of course, other 10 marks are with chapter 2 and 3, but 2 marks with chapter 6 as well. So that's the breakup. Of course, you can plan your preparation accordingly, and you know that where you cannot leave a gap, right? Chapter 6 is anyway small, so you don't have a provision to leave a gap. But when it comes to chapter 1, chapter 4, and chapter 5, there should be no such word which you do not know. Make sure that you are going through everything in that context or that particular way or approach. So put together, I think this basically helps us to understand how this entire syllabus is drafted, how this entire examination works. And don't forget, probably in the introduction, I forgot to mention that some of the questions, which is like 1 or 2 questions, will even have 5 options. And you will be asked to select 2 of them. Okay, you will be asked to select 2 of them as the right answers. So remember, in this case, you will be having 5 options. And whenever you see 5 options, make sure you select 2 answers, and you'll have check boxes if you're appearing online. So you have to select 2 of them. And both of them have to be correct to get 1 mark. If any one goes wrong, then you are partially incorrect, which means you are not sure about this concept. And that's where you don't get any marks. So there is no half marks for this particular examination. Okay, so put together, that summarizes our entire journey of this particular syllabus and this particular certification. So that's all from this particular tutorial team. Wishing you all the very best for your preparation and the examination. You know what exactly to do. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, any queries, any doubts, and any clarifications. I'm always here to address your queries and answer them well. Till then, keep learning, keep exploring, keep understanding the context. Thanks for watching the video, team, and happy learning.